Whether it's because we lack faith in players to create meaning in their experiences, or because it's simply the path of least resistance, game designers and the industry for the most part are much more attached with the idea of controlled experiences in games. This week, Josh Sutphin takes a closer look at this and makes an argument for why designers need to shed this God complex when creating games. My name is Ryan Wianco, and you're listening to Industry Broadcast. Before we start today's article, I would like to thank Mr. Josh Sutphin for providing what is his first of hopefully many articles for Industry Broadcast, and remind everybody that his blog can be found at thirdhelix.wordpress.com. Designers have a God complex. Many video game designers are attuned to controlled experiences, like you might find in Halo or Half-Life. We argue that this creates a more immersive and consistent experience for players. We call out more open-ended games such as Oblivion or many MMOs for their lack of focus, for the fact that players can so easily break the pacing and flow of the story. We posit that carefully crafted encounters and well-placed cutscenes bring to bear the game designer's deeper understanding of fun in a way that the untrained and unconstrained player could never hope to compete with. In short, we're reluctant to accept the idea that maybe, just maybe, players can be as good at creating their own experiences as we are at creating experiences for them. I suspect this is in part a path of least resistance. Tightly directed experiences bear numerous similarities to film, and film is a well-established medium for which there exists lots of literature, lots of examples, and lots of expertise to mine. Open-ended experiences, on the other hand, do not resemble any established medium, as they are very much on the frontier of game design theory, and it is with open-ended experiences that our designer God complex tends to become a liability. Asking the right question. Traditionally, we ask, what do we want players to do, and how do we make them do it? As such, much of our energy in production is spent keeping players securely strapped in the ride that we've created for them, because when a player runs off the rail, he breaks the experience. It takes a significant amount of time, testing, and iteration to player-proof a level in this way. Instead, we should ask, what do players want to do, and how do we allow them to do it? Instead of a roller coaster ride, we create a playground, filled with interesting things that have interesting interactions. Now there's no rail in which the players must carefully be confined. Exploration becomes a designer's ally instead of his enemy. It's important, however, to maintain a sense of meaningful play. A playground in the traditional sense, a swing set, a slide, some monkey bars, is not a compelling experience as players expect from a video game, because there's no particular meaning attached to the objects in the playground, no overriding goal, no spectrum on which to measure concepts of success and failure, and certainly no conflict. So how do we imbue open-ended gameplay with meaning? An approach to reactive design. First, we need a basic framework for the game experience we're trying to create. This includes high-level details such as target audience, genre, high concept, and basic fiction. These details establish an experience space for the game. In essence, they define the boundaries and allow us to identify particular experiences as in or out. For example, consider the following hypothetical and stereotypical game concept. Target audience, 18 to 35 male. Genre, first-person shooter. High concept, join a squad of space marines to fight off an alien threat hell-bent on the destruction of Earth. I'll spare you the details of the game's fiction, but suffice to say the Space Marines have access to high-tech weapons and capital ships, and the aliens are swarms of bug-like creatures with psionic abilities. I told you it was stereotypical. We'll add a note of interest by saying that Earth has been under assault for some time, and many of its major cities have been turned into ruined war zones. Given this game concept, we can place certain experiences inside the experience space. Defend a target from attacking aliens, infiltrate and destroy an alien nest, shoot down alien capital ships, and we can place other experiences outside the experience space, such as developing a romantic relationship, matching light-colored gems for points, and engaging in deep, branching conversations with NPCs. These details are simple enough to be summarized in less than a page, but they already greatly focus our design. Next, we need to choose a design scope to consider. Are we designing a whole campaign arc, a single game level, a specific encounter within that level? For our example game, let's say we're designing one mission. Looking at some of the experiences that we've already placed inside of our experience space, let's say that this mission is to defend a target from attacking aliens. Now we brainstorm, but we're going to do it from the perspective of the player, not the designer. Start by considering what the player knows is going on. In this case, the player knows he's supposed to defend a target of some value, and that aliens are going to attack it. But he also knows a lot of things from high-level fiction. He's a space marine to start. He has access to the world's best military technology, including capital ships. The aliens have psionic abilities. The city is a ruined war zone. Of course, you'll be likely to have resolved your own fiction in much more detail. Now, keeping all of those bits in mind, think of all the things that the player might want to do or enjoy at this point. For example, he might want to call in an orbital strike from a friendly capital ship. Perhaps he wants to set up a defensive perimeter of turrets and trip mines. And maybe he would like to fall back into a ruined building for shelter as it's being shelled by invaders. Try to come up with 15 to 20 such examples. Don't think about what you can or can't do, or about what a game designer might think of as cool. Just focus on what players might expect to do, given the fiction you're dropping them in. In short, think of all the ways that you can deliver on their fantasies. Once you have the list, put your game designer hat back on, and start to call the outliers. Outliers are experiences which, among many other things, are technically infeasible, run counter to the game's fiction, tone, or style, and are totally one-off, run the risk of scope problems or gameplay inconsistency. You should still have 10 or so experiences left. Now look for a trend in those experiences. For example, are there 3 or 4 items on the list that all, in some way or another, have to do with being pinned down by withering enemy fire? If so, then you've just identified an anchor experience for this mission. Anchor experiences can be used to give the mission a unique feel, making it stand out against other missions in your game. Now that you have a focused list of experiences that deliver on the player's fantasies for the fiction against which they're set, as well as an anchor experience for the mission, you're ready to start building the playground. As you start each area, ask yourself if and how, for each experience, you can enable the player to have that experience in the area. It is perfectly acceptable, desirable in fact, to enable multiple experiences in a single area. This is the essence of reactive design, building a playground that reacts in an engaging way to as many player choices as possible. Our example mission tasks the player with defending a target against an alien attack. Looking at our list of experiences, we might decide that the target is a VIP who's hiding in a ruined building. The player might choose to hole up inside the building, as well to stay close to the VIP, in which case we should script the attacking force to begin shelling the building, thus fulfill one of the experiences on our list. In addition, we might set up a plaza out front of the building with a wide semicircle of cover with a few distinct entry points, and place a cache of deployable turrets and trip mines in that plaza. This arrangement provides the player the alternative strategy of setting up a defensive perimeter around the plaza, thus avoiding the shelling and delivering another of the experiences on our list. Finally, the player might have been equipped with a targeting beacon, which can be used to call in orbital strikes at the location where the beacon is placed. to be used in case of emergency. He has just one beacon, and there are several engagements in the mission where he might get into trouble, so it's up to him whether or not to use the precious orbital strike on the aliens in the plaza or save it for later. In either case, we've made possible the third experience from our list. In this example, it's entirely possible that the players will use all three strategies together. This is perfectly acceptable, and is in fact more engaging because the player has the choice to identify and employ combined strategies himself, thus taking ownership of the solution rather than being forced upon him by the designer. Playground, not roller coaster. Shedding our God complex. For some of us, putting so much trust in the player's ability to create a fun experience in our playground is a difficult approach to get used to. We worry that players will expose our dirty laundry, make poor decisions that lead to awkward gameplay, or simply pass right on by our expertly crafted content without even noticing or appreciating it. But we can take solace in the fact that when players identify and employ their own solutions, when they take ownership of those solutions, they feel much more connected to the game than they ever did under our overprotective wing. We should ask ourselves what players want to do and how we can allow them to do it, instead of what we want players to do and how we can make them do it. I've outlined a high-level approach to concept design, with focus on delivering the player's fantasies and building a playground that reacts in an engaging way to as many player choices as possible. But now it's time to dig a little deeper into one method for developing such a reactive playground. Oh God, it's a combinatorial explosion. In most cases throughout our industry's history, it seems that games have taken the approach of defining relationships between game elements in a very explicit way. This is a three-dimensional problem: two axes of game elements for the elements that are interacting, and a third axis describing the interaction context, usually the verb that element A does to element B. Every point in space is an explicitly defined relationship, meaning that as game elements, or worse, new verbs are added, we rapidly approach a combinatorial explosion of functionality. This creates a chilling effect on the addition of new elements and mechanics due to high production costs, which in turn leads to static, lifeless game worlds and games of guess the designer's intention. For example, we might define three game elements: a concrete slab, a vial of oil, and a flamethrower. Now, we desire an interaction whereby the player can break the vial of oil on the concrete slab, and then light the oil and thus the slab on fire with the flamethrower. Using this approach, we must define multiple explicit relationships. For example, flamethrower to concrete slab, flames are blocked, slab is unaffected. Flamethrower to vial of oil, vial explodes. Vial of oil to concrete slab, vial breaks, concrete slab becomes oiled concrete slab. Flamethrower to oiled concrete slab. Slab catches on fire and burns for 30 seconds. Now, this doesn't seem so bad, but what if we have to add just one more game element, a sheet of plywood that we expect can be burned? We have to add several more relationships. Flamethrower to plywood. Plywood catches on fire and burns for 30 seconds. Vial of oil to plywood. Vial breaks, plywood becomes oiled plywood. Flamethrower to oiled plywood. Plywood catches on fire and burns for 60 seconds. At this point, we probably want to redefine our flamethrower to vial of oil relationship to ensure that fire explosion can ignite nearby plywood. So, flamethrower to vial of oil, vial explodes, all nearby plywood catches on fire and burns for 30 seconds. This is fast becoming unwieldy, and we've barely got any game elements. Let's try a better way. What can we get for almost free? A different approach is not to define relationships between game elements at all, but instead to define relationships between properties, and then tag game elements, objects, and verbs with any desired combination of those properties. Once a reasonable foundation of properties has been established, we'll rarely need to add more. but we can now add game elements for almost free, because their behaviors inherently come entirely from the properties with which they're tagged. Reprising our above example, we can define a few properties to encompass our desired behaviors. Flammable. This object can be caught on fire. Fire. This object can ignite flammable things. Breakable. This object can be broken by a collision with sufficient force. Coating. When this object breaks against something, it coats that other object with its contents. We can implement these properties in a general way in our game engine, and then tag our previous game objects with them. Flamethrower, fire. Vial of oil, breakable, coating, oil. Oil, flammable, concrete slab, none. It should be obvious at this point how our previous interactions are preserved without having implemented explicit element-to-element relationships. Instead, we implemented behaviors for properties, then reused those behaviors for elements tagged with those properties. Now, if we want to add a sheet of plywood, we simply do this. Plywood, flammable, breakable. Aside from the fact that somebody still has to model and texture the asset, we now have a sheet of plywood that works within our existing game systems without having implemented any new explicit relationships at all. Flammable and breakable were already defined and used by existing game elements, and simply reused here. This is clearly a significant production savings, especially as the number and complexity of game elements increases. That the addition of a game element is now much cheaper to do means that designers can feel free to experiment and populate their worlds with interesting behaviors. We also gain the benefits of consistency. For example, all flammable things behave the same, and a much simpler test matrix. If one flammable thing works as expected, all flammable things are now known to work as expected. Embracing property-driven design empowers designers to apply the full force of their creative will without overwhelming the rest of the team with technical requirements. And of course, empowered designers create the most inspiring games. And that wraps it up for the first of many audio articles from Josh Sutphin, whose blog can be found at thirdhelix.wordpress.com. My name is Ryan Wienko, signing off from IndustryBroadcast.com, where we endeavor to bring the collective insight of the gaming industry to your ears.